Hello students, welcome back. We are continuing with our previous year question discussion for sociology optional. This time I have come with question number 2A 2025. I have slightly evolved. Previously I was writing with hand, but right now I have prepared a PPT presentation for you. So you would like it and you will understand better what exactly is what should be the answer of the question. So this is the second A question of 2025. What is positivism? Critically analyze the major arguments against it. Here, for this, what you need to know first what is positivism, and second, non-positivist approach, which are also called as phenomenological approach. So first we will try to discuss what is positivism. See, this positivism is derived from a French term positif, Positif, and positive means imposed on the mind by experience. Here, experience means sensory. That means before positivism, the things were explained on the basis of laws of mind. But now it says that things should be explained, phenomena should be explained on the basis of sensory experience. Senses, we have five senses: nose, ear, tongue, skin, right? And uh, eye, right? So five are there. So whatever we capture through these five senses, based on that, we describe the things, then it is called as positivism. Now, the first time this term was used by Saint-Simon, right? Claude Henry Saint-Simon. But in sociology, the father of positivism is Auguste Comte, who is also known as the father of sociology. Now, how to define this positivism? An ideology that argues that scientific method means the method that was used in the study of or the analysis of natural objects, natural forces, that can and should be applied in the study of society. Now the question is, what does that scientific method do when we apply it on objects of nature or natural forces? What we do? We arrive at cause and effect relationship, a kind of generalization, a kind of abstraction, right? Why? Because you might have read that if an object is stationary or moving, it changes status only under the impact of external forces. That's what Newton's first law of motion. That means object behave under external constraints. Here also what it says, that human behavior is also constrained by external forces, right? Means they deny the existence of consciousness or subjective consciousness. So what happens if you apply, you come to the cause and effect relationship, that is called as generalization, causal analysis, abstract laws. So simple meaning, as we have laws in natural science, we can also have such laws in social science, in our context, sociology. Now, what is the reason? What is the reason? There must be certain reason to explain that. So this is called basic premise. Premise means assumption, right? So there are certain assumptions of positivists like Auguste Comte, Emile Durkheim, etc. On the basis of those assumptions, they argue that human being also is subjected to certain laws. So what are the basic premise? First is nature of subject matter of sociology is same as the natural object or natural forces. As I said earlier, as objects of nature behave under external factors, under the impact of external forces, human behavior also is product of external forces. So this is what human behavior is, product of external force. Human behavior can be quantified and measured. For example, there are different dimensions of objects. For example, suppose I say we need to measure this object. So actually we don't measure the object, we measure certain dimensions of the object. For example, we may measure length, we may measure weight, we may measure density, we may measure temperature, right? So there are certain characteristics of this which can be quantified and measured. Similarly, what it says, human behavior can also be quantified and measured. Now, what are the idea behind that? At this point of time, it is difficult to explain, but that because that will take a lot of time. So now human behavior can be quantified and measured. Objective measurement scales can be devised. So for temperature measurement, we have degree centigrade, degree Fahrenheit. Similarly, there would be certain dimension of human behavior. For that, we can have measurement scale. Like when we move forward, we see in the other part, then we'll find there are many measurement scales in social sciences. For example, Gutmann scale, Likert scale, Bogart's social distance scale, etc., etc. These are the scales that are devised to measure the human behavior. Now, this is definitely pristine observation is possible. Pristine observation is possible. Pristine observation means the original nature can be captured, right? So this is about positivism. What we said, we defined positivism. So you have to define positivism. Then you have to describe what are the basic premises on the basis of which Comte conceived that we can have a science of society in the same way as we have in natural science, right? In fact, if you see, then Comte first used the term social physics to name this discipline in 1822, but later on in 1837-38 he changed this name to sociology. Now, what are the argument against this positivist ideology? Now, this is from neo-idealism perspective, phenomenological perspective. There are different names, Rickert, Windelband, and here the most important is Max Weber. Now, if you see previous year questions, then once a question has come, what is neo-idealism? There is a difference between idealism and neo-idealism. So that we are not going to discuss. Here what we are saying, phenomenology says there is fundamental difference between the subject matter of natural science and social science. Natural science do not possess subjective consciousness, whereas human being possesses subjective consciousness. Here what you see, if we have to make the difference, what it says, objects of nature only react. Objects of nature react only, but human being along with the reaction acts too, right? So simple meaning, if the situations are same, constraints are same, factors are same, different human being would define it differently and can have different course of action. This is based on what is known as subjective consciousness. So what it says, does not simply react but acts too. Sensory observation is required and inevitable, but interpretation plays important role. Now, if you read Weber, you go in detail, Weber also says that there is a role for sensory observations or sensory experience. Weber is not of the opinion that social phenomenon should be explained on the basis of intuition. Rather, social phenomenon must have the basis of, for explanation of social phenomenon, the basis should be sensory experience. What it acknowledges that human being possesses subjective consciousness to an extent. It means human being is emotional, human being is a thinking being. Different people do not react in a similar way to the different same situation, etc., etc. Now, among the neo idealists, one Weber is there. Then we have this two theory: Alfred Skous, the phenomenological sociologist, and there is another, Harold Garfunkel, who has given the theory of ethnomethodology. And you will find that before 2025, a question had come: ethnomethodological and phenomenological criticism of positivism. What they had said: discuss the ethnomethodological and phenomenological criticism of positivism. Now, the same question is being repeated but differently, right? So, what we see here, Alfred Skous, the phenomenological sociologist, the original propounder of phenomenological philosophy is Edmund Husserl, right? Husserl was a philosopher. Skous used his philosophy in sociology. So, what exactly is this, right? The foundational block of knowledge is interpretation, interpretative explanation of sensory experience that are meaningless. If you see, then you have to go back, you have to hypothetically imagine a situation. The hypothetical imagination is the first time, suppose there is a person who develops vision, right? Definitely, it's very difficult to locate, but in science, we need to hypothesize the situation, imagine the situation, and based on that, we explain the things. So, first time, suppose somebody got vision, and at that time, when he saw outside, what did he see? He saw something green, something moving, etc., etc. Right? Now, what it says, phenomenology says that these sensory experiences are meaningless. What happens? Human being, the person who first time observed this, he gives meaning to it. For example, if something is growing on its own, if something is moving, right, then what it says, these are living beings. Those who are not, they are non-living beings, right? One who is taking breathing, he is living being. One who is not breathing is living non-living being. Now you will see here that we can observe an organism as breathing, but we cannot observe a tree as breathing. But tree is also considered as living being, right? So this type of interpretation happens first time, means what we observe and what we say, there is a difference between that. The first time when that is interpreted, what happens? This knowledge is shared. What it says, sensory experiences are faceless and meaningless. What we come to know is interpretative explanation of sensory experience. Now, this meaning is shared by the members of the society, right? Knowledge is shared, not objective. Means it is not true, it is shared. Since all believe that it is true, that's why it is true. Otherwise, it is not true in the absolute sense of the term. Means you can never say what is right or true. Shared knowledge is dynamic, not fixed. Means this knowledge, shared knowledge, also keep on changing. And that's why Alfred School says that positivist perception of order is illusion. Now, if the basis of the foundational knowledge is interpretation, that is common sense of a person, then its final outcome cannot be objective, right? So positivists consider there exists order in society, but actually, according to Alfred Schools, it is illusion. What they say, there is nothing like real order. It is perceived and substantiated through selective observation. This is also called selective biasness. Suppose you are going into the field with this idea that there exists order in society. Naturally, what happens? Your observation suffers from selective biasness. Selective biasness means you will simply bypass those things which are going against your conviction, right? So this is called selective observation or selective biasness. So when your data is not objective, naturally your claim cannot be objective. This is what it says. Now, when you read Suicide of Durkheim theory of suicide, in that John Maxwell Atkinson, he has criticized Durkheimian theory of suicide, and the basis is the data on suicide is not objective. So what we have written here, John Maxwell Atkinson criticizes Durkheim's claim of objectivity of data on suicide, right? He says the data is not objective. Why the data is not objective? Because it happens, how do you come to describe a case of death or unnatural death as suicide? There is an official position in European society that is known as coroner. And coroners identify cases of unnatural death as accident, as murder, and as suicide. Right? So unnatural death can be categorized into three types, whether it is a case of suicide, or it is a case of accident, or it is a case of murder. Now these coroners are trained that if this is the situation, then you should consider it as suicide. For example, suppose a lady dies in a fire inside a kitchen and the door is closed from outside. Coroner would define it as a case of murder. But it may happen that the lady would have asked somebody else that for a brief period close the door from outside, and in that period an accident would have occurred or blast in the cylinder would have occurred, right? Or she would have catch fire in her clothes and then she died, right? Now what is happening? Coroner will defining it as a case of suicide, whereas it is an accidental death, right? Simple meaning is that the cases of suicide, the data on suicide cited by Emile Durkheim is not objective. And when the data is not objective, your claim cannot be objective. So this is what it says. coroners are trained to define a case, there is a mistake here, a case of unnatural death as suicide, even though it is not. Right? So, in such situation, what will happen? There is a data is not objective. Right? So, this way, ethnomethodology and phenomenology has criticized this theory of positivism. Now, it is concluded. You have to elaborate this, and right. So, we are finishing this question. Thank you.